A ranger's life is one of solitude and watchfulness, but sometimes the wild offers a connection so profound it rewrites every rule. This is the story of Elias, a seasoned ranger, and a tiny, orphaned leopard cub that followed him home, and what happened years later when that cub returned, bearing a secret that would echo through the acacia thorns and across the sun-baked plains. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you believe kindness exists in the wild, hit that like button and subscribe. The core tension of this tale isn't just about survival against the odds, though that in itself is a powerful narrative. It's about an unexpected bond, a silent promise exchanged between man and beast, and the astonishing way that promise was fulfilled, years later, in a manner no one could have foreseen. The true mystery wasn't just the cub's survival, it was the bond that formed, and the silent promise held in its amber eyes, a promise that would one day be kept. The African sun, a relentless, molten disk, climbed higher, baking the ochre earth of the vast Karangani Reserve. Elias, a man whose face was a roadmap of seasons spent under that same sun, moved with the quiet patience of the wilderness itself. His khaki shirt was damp against his back, his boots scuffed from countless miles walked across the savannah. For 3 decades, this had been his world, the rustle of unseen creatures in the tall grass, the distant roar of a lion staking its claim, the silent, watchful eyes of giraffes observing his passage. He was a guardian, a steward, his presence a subtle thread in the intricate tapestry of life and death that played out daily. His small, stone-built cabin, nestled at the edge of a sparse woodland, was more an extension of the wild than a barrier against it. It offered shelter, but little else in the way of comfort, for comfort was a luxury Elias rarely sought. His companions were the stars at night and the chorus of insects that sang him to sleep. The drought had been particularly harsh that year. The once lush grasses were brittle and yellowed, the waterholes shrinking to muddy pits where animals congregated in uneasy truce, their usual caution overridden by thirst. It was a time of heightened tension, when the line between predator and prey was drawn even finer, and the weak seldom saw another dawn. Elias had seen more death than usual in recent weeks, the gaunt frames of herbivores, the desperate hunts of carnivores. It was the way of things, a brutal but necessary cycle he had long come to accept, though acceptance never entirely dulled the ache of empathy. One sweltering afternoon, during a patrol along a dried-up riverbed, his attention was snagged not by a sound, but by an absence of it. The usual chatter of birds was hushed. A lone vulture wheeled lazily overhead, a dark omen against the bleached sky, its patience a chilling testament to the suffering below. Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He slowed his pace, his senses sharpening, reading the subtle language of the bush. A faint, almost inaudible whimper, like a sigh caught on the hot breeze, reached him. It was so delicate he might have dismissed it as the wind, but his ears were tuned to the frequencies of distress. He moved towards a dense thicket of thorn bushes, his hand resting instinctively on the worn handle of the machete at his belt, not for aggression, but for clearing a path, or perhaps defense. Another, weaker cry. Parting the thorny branches, he saw it. A leopard cub, no bigger than his 2 hands clasped together, lay curled in a shallow depression in the dust. Its spotted coat, usually a perfect camouflage, seemed to offer no protection now. It was matted with dirt, its tiny ribs visible with each shallow, ragged breath. Its eyes, disproportionately large in its small face, were clouded with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. There was no sign of its mother. Elias scanned the surroundings, his gaze sweeping the sparse cover, the heat haze distorting the distant trees. Leopard mothers were fiercely protective, rarely straying far from their young, especially one so vulnerable. He listened for the low, guttural contact call a mother would make, but the air was still, heavy with an oppressive silence that spoke volumes. The circling vulture was a more eloquent messenger. He knew, with a grim certainty that settled like a stone in his gut, that the mother was not coming back. Perhaps a poacher's snare, a rival predator, or an accident, the wild was indiscriminate in its cruelty. Elias crouched, his movements slow, unthreatening. The cub flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. It tried to lift its head, emitting another weak mewl. Protocol dictated non-interference. Nature had its course, however harsh. He was a ranger, an observer, not a rescuer of every doomed creature. But this was different. The cub was so utterly alone, so heartbreakingly fragile. Its chances of survival, measured in hours if not minutes, were 0. He had seen lionesses adopt orphaned cubs of their own kind, but a leopard cub this young, without its mother, was a death sentence. He remained there for a long time, wrestling with his conscience, the sun beating down on his neck. He thought of the countless times he had witnessed the stark realities of this land, the unblinking gaze of survival. Yet, the sight of this tiny creature, fighting a battle it could not win, chipped away at his hardened resolve. The whimper came again, weaker this time, a sound that pierced through years of cultivated detachment. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. He couldn't just walk away. He carefully extended a hand, his voice a low murmur, more a vibration in the air than actual words. "Easy now, little one. Easy." The cub tensed, but lacked the strength to hiss or flee. Its eyes, a dull amber, fixed on him. Gently, Elias scooped it up. It was lighter than he expected, a fragile bundle of bone and soft fur. Its tiny heart hammered against his palm. He tucked it inside his shirt, against his skin, hoping his body heat would offer some comfort, some semblance of maternal warmth. The walk back to his cabin was slow, measured. With each step, Elias felt the weight of his decision, not just the physical weight of the cub, but the moral implications. He was crossing a line, interfering in a way he had always cautioned others against. Yet, the faint, rhythmic breathing against his chest, the slight stirring of the tiny body, solidified his resolve. This was not just another animal. This was a life he had chosen, for better or worse, to intersect with his own. Reaching his cabin, he laid the cub on an old blanket in a quiet corner. It was barely responsive. Dehydration was severe. He knew he had to get fluids into it, and fast. He had some powdered milk supplement, kept for emergencies, though usually for injured herbivores he might need to temporarily care for. He mixed a small amount with lukewarm boiled water, testing the temperature carefully on his wrist. Using an eyedropper he kept for cleaning his equipment, he gently squeezed a few drops onto the cub's pale tongue. It was a painstaking process. The cub was too weak to suckle properly. Most of the liquid dribbled out. He persevered, drop by drop, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues before surrendering to the velvet darkness. Elias didn't light his usual lamp, relying on the faint moonlight filtering through the small window, unwilling to disturb the fragile life in the corner. He sat with the cub through the night, a silent vigil. Occasionally, he would offer more drops of milk, sometimes succeeding in getting a tiny amount down. He spoke to it in low, soothing tones, the words less important than the cadence of his voice. He told it about the stars, about the resilience of the acacia trees, about the way the moon cast shadows that danced like spirits on the plains. He wasn't sure if it was for the cub's comfort or his own. The silence of his cabin, usually a familiar friend, now felt charged with a desperate hope. Towards dawn, as the first birds began their tentative chorus, the cub stirred more purposefully. It made a small, slightly stronger sound, and its nose twitched. When Elias offered the eyedropper again, it made a weak attempt to grasp it with its mouth, its tiny tongue rasping against the plastic. A small victory, but it felt monumental. The days that followed blurred into a routine of meticulous care. Elias named her Malaika, meaning angel, in Swahili, a name that felt fitting for a creature plucked from the jaws of death. He fed her every few hours, cleaned her, and kept her warm. He learned the nuances of her cries, the sharp pang of hunger, the softer mewl of discomfort. He fashioned a makeshift den from a cardboard box lined with old shirts, a place where she could feel secure. Slowly, miraculously, Malaika began to rally. Her eyes cleared, regaining their natural, luminous amber. Her spotted coat started to regain its sheen. She began to explore her small world, at first with wobbly, uncertain steps, then with increasing confidence. Elias found himself captivated. He would watch her for hours as she stalked dust motes and sunbeams, pounced on his shoelaces with comical ferocity, or simply curled up asleep on his lap, her tiny body rising and falling with each breath. A bond was forming, unspoken but undeniable. She would greet his return from patrols with excited chirps and rubs against his legs, her purr a surprisingly loud rumble for such a small creature. His solitary existence had been breached, filled with a warmth and a purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. He taught her, in his own way. He would take her on short excursions just outside the cabin, letting her feel the earth under her paws, smell the myriad scents of the bush. He never leashed her, trusting her instinct to stay close, an instinct that, for now, was firmly tethered to him. But as Malaika grew, so did the inevitable dilemma. She was a wild animal, a leopard. Her instincts, though tempered by her upbringing, were sharpening. She would watch birds with an intense focus, her body low to the ground, tail twitching. She practiced her pounces on unsuspecting lizards. Elias knew he couldn't keep her. It was not her world, this half-life between human dwelling and the wild. To do so would be a disservice to her true nature, a selfish act. The reserve was her birthright, and he had to prepare her for it, however much the thought pained him. The process of rewilding was gradual, heartbreaking. He started leaving kills for her, small animals he found already dead, or later, ones he discreetly dispatched, to encourage her hunting instincts. He reduced their direct contact, forcing her to rely more on herself. He would take her deeper into the bush, then slip away, watching from a distance as she navigated, explored, and eventually began to make her own tentative kills. Each step towards independence was a pang in his heart, a mixture of pride and sorrow. She was becoming magnificent, her movements fluid and powerful, her spotted coat a masterpiece of natural camouflage. The playful cub was transforming into a formidable predator. There were setbacks. Once, she returned to the cabin with a deep gash on her shoulder, probably from a territorial dispute or a difficult hunt. Elias cleaned and treated the wound, his hands gentle, his heart aching. During those days of recovery, she reverted to her cub-like dependence, seeking his comfort, and the old intimacy returned, making the eventual separation even harder. He saw other leopards sometimes on his patrols, magnificent and elusive. He imagined Malika among them, a queen in her own right. The day he knew he had to fully let her go was one of the hardest of his life. He took her to a remote part of the reserve, an area rich with game and good cover, far from human encroachment. He crouched, and she came to him, rubbing her head against his cheek, her purr a familiar comfort. He stroked her fur, memorizing the feel of it, the scent of her. "Go now, Malika," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is where you belong. Be wild. Be free." He stood and walked away, not looking back, though every instinct screamed at him to turn, to call her back. He didn't hear her follow. When he finally dared to glance over his shoulder from a great distance, she was gone, vanished into the bush as if she were a spirit of the wild. The silence in his cabin that night was deafening. The absence of her small, warm presence left a void that echoed in the quiet rooms. He resumed his solitary patrols, the reserve feeling both familiar and strangely empty. He would scan the trees, the rocky outcrops, half expecting to see her, but she remained elusive. He found her tracks sometimes, a thrill coursing through him to know she was alive, surviving. He heard tales from other rangers, whispers of a particularly bold and beautiful young female leopard seen in the Northern Territories, his territories. He hoped it was her. Years passed. Elias grew older, his hair grayer, his face more deeply etched by the sun and wind. The memory of Malika became a cherished, bittersweet story he held close to his heart, a testament to a unique chapter in his life. He never expected to see her again. Leopards were solitary, territorial creatures. Once they established their range, they rarely ventured far, and certainly not back to a human dwelling. He accepted this. It was the natural order. His intervention had been an anomaly, a temporary reprieve for her, a profound experience for him. Then, one cool dawn, as the sky was just beginning to blush with the promise of sunrise, Elias was tending to the small herb garden he kept beside his cabin. A flicker of movement at the edge of the clearing caught his eye. He straightened slowly, his senses instantly on alert. It was too large for a diker, too stealthy for a baboon. And then, a familiar silhouette emerged from the acacia shadows, stepping into the pale light with a liquid grace that stole his breath. It was a leopard, fully grown, powerful, her coat a mesmerizing pattern of rosettes. Her amber eyes, intelligent and unwavering, were fixed on him. Elias stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs. It couldn't be. After all this time? Yet, there was something in her gaze, a recognition, a stillness that was not the usual wariness of a wild leopard encountering a human. He saw a faint, old scar above her left eye, a tiny notch in her ear, marks of survival, marks he vaguely remembered, or perhaps imagined. Malika, he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. The leopard took another deliberate step forward, then another. She was not aggressive, nor was she fearful. There was an unnerving calmness about her, a sense of purpose. Elias remained still, his mind racing. Why would she return? What did she want? Wild animals, especially predators, did not seek out human contact unless they were desperate, injured, or had become dangerously habituated. Malika appeared to be in prime condition, sleek and healthy. He was aware of the potential danger. This was not the cub he had raised. This was a mature, wild predator. Yet, Overriding the caution was a surge of incredulous joy, a disbelief that this moment was actually happening. She stopped about 20 feet from him, just at the edge of the small, sun-dappled patch of ground in front of his cabin. She let out a low, soft sound, not a growl, but a rumbling chuff, a sound he vaguely recalled from her cubhood, a sound of greeting, of reassurance. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched, his entire being focused on her, trying to decipher the meaning of this extraordinary visitation. The air was thick with an almost palpable tension, a mixture of old familiarity and the inherent wildness that now defined her. He could see the rise and fall of her flanks as she breathed, the slight twitch of her tail. She was a queen, magnificent and self-possessed. Then she turned her head slightly, looking back towards the denser bush from which she had emerged. She made another soft, almost inaudible sound, a gentle summons. Elias held his breath. What was she doing? Was she calling another leopard? Was this a territorial display he was misinterpreting? His hand instinctively moved towards the sturdy walking stick he always carried, not as a weapon, but as a point of stability, a reassurance. From the shadows of the acacias, two smaller shapes detached themselves. Tiny, spotted, and utterly captivating. Leopard cubs. Not one, but two. They were hesitant at first, blinking in the growing light, their movements a little clumsy, their big blue-gray kitten eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Malika looked at them, then back at Elias, a clear, unambiguous gaze. She then took a few steps towards the cubs, nudging them gently forward with her head. Elias felt a wave of emotion so profound it almost buckled his knees. He understood. This was her secret. This was why she had returned. She hadn't come for food, or for help. She had come to show him, to share this most precious part of her life with the human who had once saved hers. It was an act of trust so immense, so beyond anything he could have imagined, that it left him speechless, his eyes stinging. The years melted away. He was no longer just a ranger observing the wild. He was a participant in a moment of almost sacred connection. The cubs, emboldened by their mother's presence, took a few tentative steps into the clearing, their tiny rosettes almost perfect miniatures of Malika's. They were perhaps 6 or 7 weeks old, still dependent, but already showing the innate wildness of their kind. One of them let out a tiny, questioning mewl, looking up at its mother. Malika responded with a soft lick to its head, then her gaze returned to Elias, steady, unwavering. It was as if she was saying, "Look, this is what became of the life you gave back to me. These are my legacy, and in a way, yours too." Elias slowly, very slowly, sank to one knee, making himself smaller, less imposing. He didn't try to approach. He knew the boundaries. This was her moment, her offering. He was merely a privileged witness. The sun was now fully above the horizon, bathing the scene in a warm, golden light. The air was still, save for the chirping of awakening birds and the soft padding of tiny paws on the dry earth. One cub, bolder than its sibling, took a few more steps towards where Elias knelt, its head cocked, regarding him with an innocent curiosity that mirrored the way Malika herself had once looked at him. Malika watched, relaxed but alert, a silent guardian. She made no move to call it back, no sign of agitation. This, Elias realized, was the ultimate demonstration of her trust. She was allowing her offspring to approach him, a human, in the heart of her wild domain. He didn't speak. Words felt inadequate, intrusive. He simply observed, his heart overflowing. He saw the strength in Malika, the fierce maternal pride. He saw the future in her cubs, the continuation of a lineage he had unknowingly helped preserve. The tension he had felt moments before had dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe and a profound humility. He was witnessing a secret of the wilderness, a private display of an interspecies bond that defied all conventional understanding of animal behavior. After a few minutes, which stretched into an eternity of silent communion, Malika made another soft sound. The cubs, responding instantly, trotted back to her side. She nuzzled each one, then, with a final, long look at Elias, a look that seemed to encompass years of shared history, of unspoken understanding, she turned. With the same fluid grace she had arrived with, she led her cubs back towards the dense cover of the acacias. She didn't hurry. It was a departure as deliberate and meaningful as her arrival. Elias remained kneeling, watching until their spotted forms merged with the dappled sunlight and shadows, disappearing as silently as they had come. He stayed there for a long time, the image of Malika and her cubs seared into his memory. The sun climbed higher, the sounds of the savannah swelled around him, but he felt as though he were in a bubble of profound stillness. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just experienced the most extraordinary moment of his life. The ranger who had once saved a tiny, dying cub had been repaid in a currency far more valuable than he could ever have imagined, a gesture of pure, unadulterated trust from the heart of the wild. He rose slowly, his body stiff, but his spirit soaring. He walked back to his cabin, the ordinary tasks of the day ahead of him, yet everything felt different, imbued with a new significance. His small act of compassion, years ago, had rippled outwards, creating echoes he could never have anticipated. He knew he would likely never see Malika or her cubs up close again. Their lives were in the wild, where they belonged. But the knowledge that they were out there, thriving, that she had chosen to share that truth with him, was a gift beyond measure. He looked out over the reserve, his gaze sweeping the familiar landscape. It was still a place of harsh beauty, of life and death, but now, for Elias, it held an even deeper magic, a testament to the enduring power of connection. He watched until they were silhouettes against the rising sun, a promise kept, a secret shared, and then, for the first time in a long, long while, a profound peace settled over the ranger's solitary world. Thanks for watching. If this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more wild moments of wonder.